when you were even talking about my transition after college, I think I was set up for success in that because I didn't go the traditional route. I didn't go to a D1 school on a scholarship. I didn't, I didn't stay in the regimented system that I was intended to growing up playing club soccer. And that was one of my good guy friends passed away at the end of my high school career, like my senior year in high school. And I was just like, I think it changed my perspective and ultimately probably my trajectory, although, it's impossible to pinpoint. But I think in that moment, I was like, okay, well, why do I want to play collegiate soccer? And that's what ultimately led me to play club soccer instead, and, not put the pressure on myself of like, I'm only as good as the school I get recruited by and how many minutes I play there, kind of the mindset I had ended up in because of playing competitive sports and being a competitive person. So I think that was like, it ended up being a pivot for me without realizing it. And then carry that into everything else that you do. I think having that perspective really early on, I would never like wish that upon anybody. I think definitely changed how I approach things and what I take seriously and what my values are. And then into skeleton, I mean, yeah. I think the whole thing has been a challenge. Like, I could go year by year and give you something that like threw me off or was hard to overcome. Skeleton's like a pretty intense environment. It's a expensive sport in expensive towns with very little funding. Your most direct competitors are your teammates who you're sharing a room with and a car with and a training time with and meals with and physio with and racing against ultimately pretty much every week. So it's a very interesting dynamic. You don't pick those people. You don't decide who's good at skeleton when you're good at skeleton, which ultimately leads to like a bunch of challenges off the track and in that environment. You also leave for season in October and you don't really come back till March. Like you go track to track to track, you get a week off for Christmas, track to track to track, living on top of the same people. Even if they were your best friends, you probably like, get away from me, you know? So it's complicated. I think it forces you to grow and prioritize. And then there's actually racing, and things that go your way, things that don't go your way. An Olympic qualification that went really well for me, an Olympic qualification that went really horrifically for me. Everything that could have gone wrong did into 2022. So yeah, I know that doesn't zero in on a ton of specifics, but I think, that's kind of life, right? Like you're constantly learning lessons and you feel like you learned a lesson and you've got the flow of it now and you got another lesson.
There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be obstacles. There's always going to be setbacks. And for many of us, we work really, really hard to avoid them and we don't want to think about them, right? But those of us who choose to embrace them, those of us to really look at those obstacles as opportunities to grow, um, that's where I think there's so much value and the ability to continue to excel and the ability to continue to get better and the ability to compete at high, high levels. And this is where I was sort of going with this at the beginning was when I've talked to any super, super successful athlete, and I mean by that is where other people look at me like, wow, you're a world champion, you're an Olympian, you're a Super Bowl champion. And you talk to them, there is so much humility and there is so much sort of like pride in the struggle, right? And sort of saying, oh, I've had struggles. And I'm not only have I had them, I've had multiple of them. And by the way, I'm happy to talk about them. And let me tell you about this one and this one and this one, because I think those of us who have been successful know that that's where the growth comes from, right? And how we frame and how we reframe these experiences are so important. So what I really appreciate about what you said is not only is it the loss of a loved one and shifting your perspective, but then it's also every year having to deal with challenges, right? And even having to figure out how to navigate that and learn more about yourself, right? I mean, you even earlier talked about you graduate college, you go to this town, right? Which is a very unique town, right? Which is a very unique touristy town. But then, like, you're trying new things. And what happens? You learn a lot about yourself and you set yourself up for. So, even the ability to continue to have to challenge yourself, right? And those you're with and continue to dig deeper in who am I? What am I doing here? How am I going to be authentic? How am I going to be true to myself? How am I going to continue to inspire myself and be motivated, but also know that it just gets harder and harder and harder. And the more I do it, the harder it gets. But that's also why I keep doing it, right? Like that goes back to your competitive
Yeah.
comment from day one is like, how can I hone in? How can I continue to compete? How can I continue to grow? And so if that's the way you approach it and you know it's only going to get harder, right? You even talked about accessing the zone, like, oh, if it was so easy, like as you get older, there's so many more things that you have to invest in. But if you're willing to sort of identify the struggles where the growth is going to come from, and that those challenges are actually setting you up to be able to become stronger and more resilient, then I think that whether you're an athlete, you're a person, you're a friend, you're a family member, a teammate, whatever it is, you're only going to continue to get better and better and better, right? And that to me, I think, is a mindset,
Yeah.
and it's a way of approaching life, knowing that the longer I do this, the more challenges I'm going to have. But that's what's so cool about it.